Hi there, and thanks for being here. This presentation, entitled The Astrology of 2020, Synchronicity of Global Events, is one which will bring closer attention to what's going on in this very pivotal year. Clearly, we have arrived at unprecedented times. 2020 was slated to be a year like this. It has been predicted for months leading up to the new year in 2020, and in some cases for years. Astrologers have recognized that this year would be a major turning point, and clearly it is, with COVID-19 and the whole world at something of a unprecedented standstill, and we're still somewhat early in the game of that, even though it began practically on Chinese New Year this year, which is its own interesting takeaway, but obviously it's growing in drama and scope and intensity all over the world. So it's worth having a little look and seeing what the astrology has to say. Now, this can be understood as part two to the initial visual presentation that I created called The Astrology of 2020, The Dawning of a New Era. In it, I rather fully explained how this year really is the dawning of a new era based on the conjunctions of Jupiter and Saturn, but it also in there is Saturn conjunct Pluto. And there's an interesting overlap there, and that adds to the intensity quite a bit. But Jupiter conjunct Saturn is a 20-year cycle, very strongly linked to the economy, as is true of Saturn Pluto as well. So I'll explain all of this in a bit. But the fact that Jupiter-Saturn conjunct every 20 years, and they do so in a certain sign and an element, and they do in rather interesting runs. For example, in the past 200 years, they've been conjunct in Earth signs 9 out of the last 10 times. And now, as we enter this new era, the first conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in an air sign, Aquarius, will be the beginning of 9 of those every 20 years, except for one, which will be in Scorpio in 2160. So 9 conjunctions of Jupiter-Saturn in air signs is the real anchoring point focusing on this new era, but Saturn-Pluto as well is significant. Now, so watch that video to get some more insights, to get a real clear download on the dates and the principles. I do a pretty good, clear job there for you. But in this one, we're looking more specifically at this year, and there's always this question among astrologers, when people have asked me, what's the chart for humanity? And really a few years ago, and I really wondered about that, and I've come to realize that it's actually not entirely indicative of who humanity is, but the January 1st chart represents the cycles that humanity goes through, and it's a key date when we can cast a chart and look at the year ahead and have a strong sense of what will happen. Now, we can also cast a chart like that for any given moment. This is what's called mundane astrology. It's the generic perspective, just the astral weather, if you like. So if there's a planet entering a new sign, we'll cast a chart. If there's a conjunction of 2 planets, especially the major planets, we'll cast a chart. And these new conjunction charts especially, but also planets entering sign charts, are sort of anchor points. They're the nails that holding down the fabric, if you would, of the larger picture. So every time there's one of those, there's another spike in the ground that's very significant in holding up the entire story that the astrology reveals. So it's quite interesting that way. Now, so the mundane astrology can be also applied to nations, cities, provinces, institutions, companies. Any legal entity can have an astrology chart. It's like a person in the eyes of the law. This is juxtaposed. Both of those are mundane astrology, and they juxtaposed to natal astrology, which is cast for a person on any given day of birth, where the day, month, year, and time and location of birth is significant for casting the natal chart. And then there's various techniques we use to predict what will happen and when, etc. But when we want to do that for all of us, it's always been this question, and the two sort of debating or competing dates are winter solstice and 12 midnight on January 1st, which launches the year. And for a long time, because Western astrology is anchored into the solstices and equinoxes, the cycle of the light of the year, which is, of course, linked to the seasons, and that's what Western astrology is based on, called tropical. So I thought for some time that it should therefore be winter solstice, but I've come to believe that no, for a couple of reasons. First of all, it does present a pretty good look at the season in front of us, yes, but there's also the fact that the southern hemisphere, it's summer solstice, so it's a bit of a conflict there at worst. So when we though think of the winter solstice as in the northern hemisphere as having 10 days leading up to January 1st, we get this wonderful countdown principle. Just like the last 10 seconds before the new year, we get this last 10 days. So it works very tidily that way. It does remain, though, that winter solstice is nature's launch pad for the year, again, in terms of the sunlight cycle. And it does establish this lovely 10-day count. So the new year on the global calendar, though, is the one partially because the whole world's focused on it. We ourselves have co-created its importance. It's not strictly natural, but even though it's a socially created date to launch the year, because in some calendars and traditions it was on spring equinox and so forth, and other such special sacred dates in some cases. But, the decision of January 1st was made some centuries ago, and so we are working with that, and it's where humanity is focused every year, so it creates a lot of power for those reasons. So at the exact stroke of midnight, 1 second into the new year, we get the birth chart for the year. All right, now that's a bit of a thing, because usually when we talk about just a chart for the year, we're referring to what's called the solar return chart, which is a chart cast in natal astrology as a predictive technique on your birthday, for the exact moment when the sun returns to the place it was when you were born, and it creates a chart where the planets are in the sky at that day, and then that provides insights and so forth that we can use to predict what will unfold over the course of the year and what the themes of growth in an evolutionary sense are. So it's quite interesting that way. So, but in this perspective, the solar return chart is each year cast. It acts as like a birth chart for the year, and each time there is one we can see ahead. So the birth chart in astrology, or the birth or natal chart and the solar return charts, symbolically reveal the destiny, which often manifests as outer events, but it can also be inner processes, inner themes of development, certainly as well. Now, so the basic takeaway here is that the time span for the solar return chart is 1 year, okay, every January 1st. Of course, every year is seen as its own whole, but it's a part of a continuum. So I like to refer to it as a link in the chain. And it's an ever-growing chain due to each new calendar year. And we can see whole periods of time. But what we do when it comes to cycles, we can use very specific planetary conjunctions to encompass cycle periods. For example, Neptune and Pluto have a 500-year cycle. So the farthest planets, while there's others now, but we'll work with those at this date, in this presentation at least. There's other further planets that have been discovered, Eris and so forth. But we're going to just work with Neptune and Pluto as encompassing 500-year periods. So, and then Uranus, Pluto is about 140-year periods. Saturn, Pluto is about 34 or 35-year periods. Jupiter, Saturn are 20-year periods. So we get this overlapping of rather long generational and multi-generational cycles that present the common denominator background. So when any of those two major planets are conjunct, wow, we all go through a major shift synchronistically. And it's really quite marvelous to observe. So we are certainly experiencing those this year in this very major epic turning point, which rings well with the date 2020. So once again, one's natal chart reveals the destiny for a lifetime, and the solar return chart shines a spotlight on the destiny for the year. Okay, so we're paralleling the two for looking at the chart for humanity, and here is the chart. Now, it does so happen, many people looking at this right now might feel a little geeked out because they don't have the language code. They haven't learned it, just like looking at a score of music, if you like, or another language, because astrology can be understood as language. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a more tidy breakdown here. And what we do in astrology, whether we're working with the natal chart or even transiting planets, the art factor of astrology includes weighing the planets, the planetary weights. So I'm going to give you a bit of a linear breakdown, then I'm going to go back to the chart and explain it to you what is there. And we'll call this part one of a series of other shorter videos that I'll create for you so you can get a real good look at this year without getting overwhelmed in one video, one sitting. So what you're going to see is that in this January 1st chart for 2020 is a stellium of planets in Capricorn. Then Saturn conjunct Pluto was very significant. Sun, Mercury, Jupiter conjunct the lunar south node. Moon exactly conjunct Neptune at 16 Pisces, very significant, which I'll explain in a moment. Chiron and Uranus sharing the lowest degree. Mars, highest degree. Mars, highest elevation. Mars, final dispositor. Mars, lead planet of a bowl-shaped chart. Wow, Mars is playing a major role this year. And by the way, Mars will be in its own sign of Aries for 6 months, starting in the summer, leading and all the way through to early 2021. But we won't focus on that today, but it is worth mentioning briefly how significant Mars is this year. Then Venus is unaspected in this chart in Aquarius, very significant, and a theme, it's a lead theme to another major focus, which I'll pay attention to, which is an emphasis on Saturn conjunct Pluto, which actually occurred on the 12th of January, so 12 days after the new year. Then Uranus retrograde as a singleton and Mercury out of bounds. Now, you're not expected to understand what all these technical terms mean, and this is a short list of planetary weights. There's literally hundreds. I work with about 25, and there's about 12 here. So I can look at a chart and be able to weigh the influence of each one very quickly by understanding the principles of planetary weights. It's really interesting and important part of astrology that not many people are very aware of. Oops. Okay, so just moving back here to the New Year chart. Now let's just go through this. So what we see first of all is a stellium of planets in Capricorn. This is Mercury, Jupiter, South Node, Sun, Saturn, Pluto. You'll notice that there's two groupings. Saturn, Pluto are alone, and then the Sun, Jupiter, Mercury are on their own. But still, they're all in the same sign, so they would generally be considered to be a couplet of stelliums in the same sign. So it really adds to the power of that sign, naturally. Now, when we look closer at that particular aspect, the very fact that the Sun, Jupiter, Pluto are conjunct the South Node is interesting because Capricorn, while every sign has more than one level of interpretation, it's an archetype, so there's a lot in it. Capricorn very much is linked to government authority. And in the astrology of 2020 Dawning of a New Era, I really show how I predicted that the governments would be very strong this year for some reason. Now, I didn't make a prediction about COVID-19 admittedly, but I was aware that events would unfold where the government would really exercise a strong arm. And not only would it do so, it would get stronger over the year. Now, the South Node actually presence there shows what can be called excess. If you were born with a planet conjunct the South Node, you might say there's an excess of that. So arguably, some will agree, some won't, but that the government is exercising too much authority. But what's happening now, many people will agree on, they're asking for quarantine, self-quarantine, etc., self-isolation, but years early yet, and we'll see what happens. And there is reason to say with Jupiter moving through Capricorn throughout the year that the government's strong arm stands to get stronger and more authoritarian, etc., etc. And there's reason to say, by the way, that this level of government authority is going to get stronger yet, but it doesn't mean everybody will like it or comply. But we'll get back to that. So the main thing is that you have 3 planets conjunct the south node, Sun, Jupiter, Mercury, very closely, and there's all in Capricorn, the sign of government or established authority and tradition, and really in a almost excessive amount of power in some manner. Now, the next thing is that, well, I'll just go through it naturally as I might without remembering the list in its exact order. I mentioned Mars having 4 key stature points. Now, Mars is really interesting in its own sign of Scorpio. Mars rules both Aries and co-rules Scorpio. So just that it co-rules is enough. It's like the sidecar of the motorcycle, if you like. It's like an appendage of sorts, but it really belongs there as well. So Mars is in Scorpio, very potent, but also violent at worst, okay? And it's the planet of highest degree. So you can look at any planet and all the degrees. Now, degrees there's only 30 degrees in a sign, and it goes 22 degrees, say, for Pluto, 23 minutes, and then there would be 60 seconds. So it goes degree, 60 minutes, 60 seconds, adding in that way the clock does. So when we see Mars as the planet of highest degree, 28, we go, wow, that's very significant. It means at the end of the day, this energy will be very strong. Then on the other hand, Mars is the planet of highest elevation. That means whatever planet's closer to this point than any other point is very, very significant. Now, admittedly, this is what's called a Sun on the first house cusp chart, so there's different ways you can look at the chart from different perspectives, but in this case, at least, it holds the position of highest elevation. There is more than one angle of a perspective one can take, by the way, but it wouldn't change the degree anyway. But it is also true that Mars is a part of this, what's called the lead planet of a bowl. So you see there's the planet Uranus and there's Mars. They're kind of across each other, and Mars moving counterclockwise becomes the lead planet. It's a principal rule when we ask what's the lead planet. We always look at it going counterclockwise. And so it plays a very important role in that regard. It's like the engine of the train, if you like, and it's driving forward in a very strong way. This is the node, so it's not a planet, so if you're wondering. So it's nodes are more, they're real, but they're not real actual bodies. So, okay. So now Mars holds that position, and all of the above makes it a potent player, and it does suggest this year would be dramatic and violent. And we saw that with the shooting down of the civilian airplane in Iran, which also was on the backlash of the shooting or assassination of one of their generals. And there's been a lot of drama and sorrow and violence in that country, sadly. Then there was the massive fires in Australia for weeks and weeks on end. We were watching that with horror and, compassion for the people there. And then no sooner did that kind of die down that COVID-19, in fact, dovetailed with it, starting, interestingly, on the public level of awareness almost exactly on a few days prior to Chinese New Year, and leading to the cancellation of it, and subsequently to the cancellation of this, that, and the other, and the closure of businesses all over the world, and, self-isolation, and here we go. Now, so the violent aspect is very evident in those regards, and we're still early in the year, so clearly people are dying. Scorpio is the sign of death, and the COVID-19 is dangerous, and there's a violent aspect, you could say, to this virus, and of course the growing number of deaths linked to that disease are another reflection of that violence. Now, one of the other more interesting things is the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in this chart. Now, you'll notice they're exactly 1 degree apart, and Saturn is the faster moving planet, so it's what we call applying to Pluto. So it's not yet exactly conjunct. When it's applying, it means that it's in the late moments of the previous cycle. It's about to, as soon as it's conjunct, which it will do on the 12th of January, it did do, it will form a new cycle, and it's about a 34-year cycle. So this represents the end of the cycle. So it does itself reveal, wow, there's something major ending. And you go, well, what kind of thing are we talking about? And it just so happens, according to the exact degrees that Saturn and Pluto hold there, it's the ending is linked to a new order probably in the world associated with climate change and the environment, and just exactly that. So it does show, therefore, that business as usual is over. One way or another, whatever businesses are active in the world, how people will be in business in the future will change. It won't be what it was. And this is very Aquarian now. Even though Chiron's a special planet in astrology because it's a bit of a maverick. It's not really a planet, but it's a planetoid. So it holds this maverick position. So it technically is the planet of lowest degree. Now, it just so happens of itself in Aries, it represents a sense of identity crisis at worst. Who am I? And why am I here? And where do I go with what I have? There's a lot of that going on this year, of course. But the other one, the more obvious choice for planet of lowest degree is Uranus. Uranus is in Taurus at 2 degrees. And what's really significant about it is that it shows that the radical change of how the economy will work. You see, Taurus is the sign of personal wealth. And so this change and this ending of social norms around the world, no less, it's sort of an initiation for the planet as a whole, collectively, together, to undergo a change of the guard, so to speak, regarding how we will conduct ourselves in business, and the realities linked to just sometimes what can be called the neglect of the environment under the pressures of free market thinking in terms of exploitation of the environment, etc., etc. So in many respects, it's kind of a welcome turning point, although we have yet to see the deeper implications of this new governmental authority and the order it will create. But that's the most important thing to understand, is that there's this ending. Even though itself it's very close, so it already shows a powerful principle, but it's this exact thing we're all experiencing. It's the powerful ending of how the things were. People are saying the world won't be the same again. That is the indicator in this astrology chart. Now, the other really, really significant factor here is Moon-Neptune conjunction exactly at 16 degrees Pisces. Now, this should have been a real signpost, and it probably was, but it wasn't easy for anybody to really interpret it. It's a little bit difficult that way. But because the archetypes can point to different modes of expression, but there might have been a few who did. The main understanding here is that Pisces is the sign that rules, get this, the glandular system, which is the body's first line of defense, basically, to, you got it, bacteria and viruses. So the fact that the moon represents the people in general, the masses, conjunct Neptune, it's sort of this collective communion. Neptune's very communal. It's very dissolve the boundaries. Okay, it's boundary dissolving. So the COVID-19, for one, is all over the world, and it doesn't have prejudice where it goes. It doesn't need a passport. It doesn't need permission. But also that, therefore, it's bringing the whole world in as positive way as it can be said together in this initiation of sorts, where, although violently, thank you, Mars playing its role here in the destined scheme of things, but Neptune, Moon Neptune there, directly linked to Pisces and the virus principle, as mentioned, but also going everywhere and quickly, and it hasn't finished its round yet, and it's bringing the world, positively speaking, together It works that way sometimes. The Kali force, if you like, the Shiva force, the ending of the old, the destruction, but also, the birthing process can have its own painful element, etc., etc. And we can speak of initiations in that regard as well. Sometimes they come with kind of a painful pinch of some sort, a castration, or that's a bit strong, but just some cropping of this or clipping of that, or something that you have to do that initiates you where the old is over and the new has begun in some kind of painful birth little ceremony of some kind. Now, so that's the moon Neptune. Really interesting that was conjunct. And in astrology, when we look at a chart, we ask, what's the most powerful aspect in the chart is a conjunction. Now, even though the moon's fast moving, it just so happens it's conjunct the far, far planet Neptune and at the exact same degree. This is extremely significant. And so, even though the cycle itself is short, because it's the chart cast for encompassing the entire year, it has a very powerful anchoring theme, therefore. Now, the other one here worth very briefly looking at is Venus. Venus is in Aquarius and technically unaspected. And I'm going to tell you more about unaspected planets in the presentation I'm going to create for you on Saturn-Pluto conjunctions, and specifically the one we had on January 12th. But an unaspected planet in a natal chart or any chart represents an unintegrated principle, okay, that it has a hard time integrating itself. So it's a wild card, but it's more often or also can be understood as something of a misfit, okay, and that's an important statement to make. So Venus in Aquarius itself, if you had to ask which is the sign that most strongly approximates humanity as a whole, it would probably be Aquarius. Okay, now it's interesting that Venus is unaspected, so there's this whole theme of misfit energy, and we see that in the world. People are like, with this ending of the new or of the old order of things, even though it was culturally different from one, country and so forth to the next, there's a collectivity here. Now, Venus is in Aquarius, and which is ruled by Uranus, and Uranus is in Taurus, which is ruled by Venus. So that positively speaking, there's a mutual reception there. And so positively, it's producing what some people are recognizing as somehow, despite the tragedy, and nobody is, taking it lightly that people are dying. Not really. It's scary, and it's sad for us all in some way. But on the high side, it's contributing to a change that we need, that the world is in need of something to change, because if we just kept going as we have been for decades upon decades of, pollution, exploitation of nature, etc., etc., we're heading for the wall, and people have been saying it for a long time, and certainly that's linked to the climate change story. So, yeah, there's something positive in this, interestingly enough. Now, I also mentioned Mercury is the planet of what's called out of bounds. Every now and then, a planet can be what's called out of bounds. It's a natural rhythmic process, but it's based on the fact that the planets are, according to the plane of the ecliptic, the apparent path of the sun, are a bit, not directly aligned. Some are a bit tilted a few degrees above, or others a few degrees below, generally speaking. So what it happens is, in the orbiting of that planet from the Earth's perspective, the planet can find itself either higher by declination or lower by declination than the Earth's tilt on its axis, which is 23 degrees 27 minutes. So if it goes beyond that, it's called out of bounds planet. If you happen to have an out of bounds planet, it operates in an excessive manner. It's a bit of a standout because it's a bit obtruse at worst. Excessive is the basic word. It's very charged and compulsive as well. Now, Mercury in Capricorn there can be seen to relate to communications, and I'm attributing this basically to the media. Now, the media has a job to do, which is to inform us, but we can also see how naturally everybody wants attention, so there's nothing wrong with that neither, but at worst it produces hype and drama. And so it's great to be informed, and everybody likes that a lot, but it also stirs drama at worst. So that's where Mercury, I think, in its out of bounds position is contributing to that. But so it's I leave it to you to decide what you think about that, but there's you go. That's the synchronicity. And that's all I really want to focus on for now, is just the synchronicity of it. So the very fact that the North Node, couple of final points, is in Cancer is quite significant, because Cancer is the sign that's ruled by the Moon. The Moon exactly conjunct Neptune in Pisces, the sign of the glandular system, which is the first line of defense to bacteria and viruses, represents, it's really a powerful indicator of that theme that we see so strongly in the world this year. COVID-19, here it is. I mean, did somebody plan it that way? And of course that's a conspiracy theory, and I'm not interested in that. I'm just interested in the synchronicity, quite frankly. So whether they did or didn't isn't my interest. My interest is the fact that it's happening, and it's on a global event, and it synchronizes well. So that's the main focus of this particular presentation. So I'm going to just go back briefly to, in fact, here, not that one, but to this one, and we'll leave you there. So we saw the stellium of planets in Capricorn. Wow, 5 plus the South Node in 2 groupings. Saturn conjunct Pluto, with Saturn applying, which means it's the end of a major 34-year cycle. And Saturn and Pluto conjunct are linked to the economy, as is Jupiter Saturn, but we'll get back to that one. And I did bring a lot of emphasis to the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in the astrology of 2020, the dawning of a new era, so I invite you to check that out. Then Sun, Mercury, Jupiter conjunct the South Node just means, wow, a real excessive emphasis on authority, government especially, and we see that, wow, it's really unprecedented that it's, we're being told what to do and how we should do it. So it's really, at worst, clipping our wings of freedom in a way, but at best, it's being done for good reason, protecting us all from one another, as the story goes. Then, okay, the Mercury conjunct Neptune, mentioned that. Uranus at the lowest degree with Chiron. It's interesting because Chiron is the planet of the wounded healer in Aries, so it's kind of representing a healing process of the identity of humanity, is a really good way of saying it. Uranus there, as the more official planet at lowest degree, represents the revolutionary impact of the economy, because Taurus represents personal wealth, and clearly if nobody's, or a lot of people are out of work, this is a big impact, on both us individually, but also collectively, due to the stall or slowdown, significant slowdown of the distribution of, or the circulation, I should say, the circulation of the wealth, which is what the true economy is. Then Mars, we talked about that. I didn't clarify that Mars in its own sign is what's called the final dispositor. Whatever planet's in its own sign holds a very extra weight. So Mars, though, just generally in Scorpio, very passionate, very powerful, very violent at worst, linked to, death. Not that that's not a part of life all the time, but wow, there it's at highest degree, highest elevation, and at the lead planet of the Bull. And I didn't exactly explain the Bull chart, by the way, represents major experiences. If you're born with a Bull chart, it means in your life you're very eager to have new experiences, and you want to, they call it, it's referred to as the scooping up of new experiences. And boy, if we aren't having new experiences this year, and that's where that keyword unprecedented comes to the fore. Then we have Venus unaspected, the wild card, the misfit. Venus representing values, and in Aquarius, the sign of generally the people in, the humanity as a whole, really. And so everybody's a bit thrown out of their norm, and we don't know where we quite belong right now. And maybe as the year unfolds, we might have to readapt ourselves. Not everybody, but many. And there'll be a lot of this, awkward, probably misfit sort of feeling. And I think, quite frankly, for other reasons, which I'm not going to get into today, but linked to the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, which I mentioned on the 12th of January, there was a lot of unaspected planets, so really watch for that. It's really interesting to see what I'm going to tell you in that presentation. Then Uranus, I didn't get into Uranus retrograde as a singleton. That means I'll actually go to that. Uranus as a singleton sits here in its own, not only quadrant, so in astrology I see 1, 2, 3, that's one quadrant, 4, 5, 6, it's another, 7, 8, 9, it's another, and 10, 11, 12 is the fourth. But you also have you have 4 hemispheres. Here's one hemisphere from this point to here, pointing to that, and then here's the opposite of that. But then you can look at it this way, across and to the top, and then across to the bottom. So you have these 4 hemispheres that are kind of overlap. But it's a singleton in its own quadrant, because the North Node matters, but it's not a planet, and its own hemisphere, and it's the only planet retrograde. So that's a very important consideration. It does hold weight for all of those reasons. And again, Uranus is the planet of sudden and unexpected change, and it's linked to personal wealth. Very interesting that it would be doing that. So it's really pushing us, we're all experiencing that one way or another, the slowdown of the economy and so on, but also, how it will come out in the wash is another matter as well. And Taurus is linked also to values and priorities. So it could go both ways, but it could amount to a lot of people really realizing maybe we don't need as much and we don't have to work as hard as we do. And maybe the world will change in ways that are good. So, that's the whole story, and I don't want to go further than that because I know it's a lot to listen to and take in, but I'm going to trust you understand and recognize that, wow, this truly is a year of major events, and we're truly seeing the birth of a whole new era, a whole new planetary culture. And while people can get carried away with conspiracy theories about who's doing it and why, I'm encouraging that, in fact, it's woven into the astrology, and it's thereby, astrology reveals natural cycles. It's not contrived. People can use any tool negatively. You can use a spoon violently if you like, but it's not meant for that strictly, but it can be done that way. And the same is true of astrology. So people will demonize anything because they're fearful, but it itself can be used in a very benevolent and light-directed way, or it can be used darkly and coercively. So if some people are using it that way, that's their business. But generally, what we see is that there's a beautiful synchronicity that stems from the planetary alignments, and wow, it's really doing that this year in this 2020 astrology chart for the new year. So there you go. I'm going to leave you there, and again, look for other videos that I'm going to bring to your attention that add to this story, so you'll get an ongoing narrative and you'll really get a close-up on each principle, or that most of which I covered here today. I'll even emphasize them more, but some that I didn't yet. So watch for those. Thanks for being here, and take care out there, everybody, and see you next time.